The number of incursions was something that was alarming to me. I don't know the actual number. I don't think anybody does, but it's in the thousands.
These unmanned high-flying intel-gathering aircraft pose threats to the security of the nation.
God, they have guns. Jesus.
Go, please.
Imagine a world where the skies are filled with silent, deadly machines, watching your every move. This isn't some sci-fi dystopia. It's the reality at the U.S. Mexico border right now. Mexican drug cartels have taken their operations to new heights, literally, by embracing drone technology like never before. These aren't your average hobby drones, either. We're talking about sophisticated flying machines, capable of surveillance, drug trafficking, and even dropping bombs. Yeah, you heard that right, bomb-dropping drones. And here's where it gets crazy. These drones aren't just staying on the Mexican side of the border. They're swarming into U.S. airspace by the thousands, creating a national security nightmare that's keeping lawmakers up at night. Buckle up, because we're about to dive into a story that's redefining the war on drugs and pushing us into a new frontier of warfare. Let's start with a scene that'll make your skin crawl. Imagine you're a Border Patrol agent patrolling the vast, empty desert along the U.S. Mexico border. The sun's beating down and all seems quiet. Suddenly, you hear a faint buzzing. You look up, and there it is, a small, unidentified drone hovering just above you. This is happening right now, and it's got border agents seriously freaked out.
¿Un dron o qué? Ese mero. ¿Dónde está el dron? Está volando derecho arriba.
Now, you might be thinking, it's just a little drone, but here's the thing. These aren't your average hobby drones. These are high-tech flying machines being used by some of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world, the Mexican drug cartels. Let's first talk numbers for a second, because they're pretty mind-blowing. We're seeing over 1,000 of these unidentified drones crossing into U.S. airspace every single month. And these aren't just random flights. These drones are on missions, gathering intel on Border Patrol movements, scouting for weak spots in our defenses, and even transporting drugs. But then, it gets even worse. Just 2 miles south of Arizona, the infamous Sinaloa cartel is using drones in a whole new way. They're not just using them for spying or smuggling anymore. They're turning these things into flying bombs, dropping explosives on rival gangs. Now, you might be wondering, how did we get here? It's been a gradual evolution, but it's kicked into high gear in recent years. The cartels have always been quick to adopt new technology. Remember those narco submarines? Well, drones are like the flying version of those. They're cheap, they're hard to detect, and they can carry a decent payload. For cartels, it's a no-brainer. The first recorded instance of a cartel using a weaponized drone was back in 2017. Mexican federal police stopped a car and found what they called a bazooka bomber drone. It was basically a drone rigged with explosives, ready to dive bomb its targets. Pretty scary stuff, right? But that was just the beginning. Fast forward to 2021, and we've got cartels like the CJNG using drones to attack police forces, and they're not shy about it either.
This is modern warfare. We use war technologies. We use drones. Here, everybody is adequately trained to use them to the maximum.
These guys are treating this like it's an actual war, and they're not pulling any punches. But it's not just about dropping bombs. These drones are giving cartels a huge advantage in their smuggling operations. Imagine you're trying to move drugs across the border. In the old days, you'd have to rely on human lookouts or just take your chances. Now, you can send up a drone and get a bird's-eye view of the entire area. You can spot Border Patrol agents from miles away. It's like having your own personal spy satellite. And here's where it gets really wild. Some of these cartels are getting training from Americans.
A cartel source telling the Daily Beast that an American man actually trained those cartel members on how to source, fly, and use these commercial drones and turn them into bombs.
It's like the U.S. is exporting drone warfare expertise to criminal organizations. Not exactly their finest hour. Now, let's talk about what this means for the U.S. Because make no mistake, this isn't just Mexico's problem anymore. These drones are crossing into U.S. airspace on a daily basis, and we're not just talking about a few isolated incidents. During a Senate Arms Committee hearing in May, one official dropped this bombshell.
The number of incursions was something that was alarming to me. I don't know the actual number. I don't think anybody does, but it's in the thousands.
Over what period of time is that, thousands?
I would say in the probably over a month.
cartels have practically infiltrated the U.S. airspace with little to no consequence. And here's the kicker: U.S. defenses aren't built for this kind of threat. The Pentagon's detection systems were designed during the Cold War to spot big, slow-moving aircraft. They're about as useful against these small, nimble drones as a fly swatter against a stealth bomber. But here's where things get really chilling. It's not just about the physical threat these drones pose. There's a psychological aspect to this that's equally terrifying. Imagine living in a border town, knowing that at any moment, a drone could be watching you. You can't see it, you can't hear it, but it's there, hovering silently, its camera trained on your every move. It's like living in a real-life version of 1984, where Big Brother isn't the government, it's the cartels.
We're afraid of getting in a car, getting in a taxi, walking in the street alone, going by the hand with your child.
This constant state of fear and paranoia is taking a toll on communities along the border. People are changing their routines, avoiding certain areas, even moving away altogether. It's like the cartels have managed to extend their reign of terror into the sky. And it's not just civilians who are feeling the pressure. Border Patrol agents are reporting increased stress and anxiety. They're trained to look for threats on the ground, but now they have to constantly watch the skies too. It's adding a whole new dimension to an already dangerous job.
The adversaries have 17 times the number of drones, twice the amount of flight hours, and unlimited funding to grow their operations.
They're essentially fighting a war where the enemy has total air superiority, and that's a scary place to be. But here's where it gets even more frightening. There's growing concern among security experts that we're on the brink of a major escalation. Right now, most of these drones are being used for surveillance and small-scale drug trafficking. But what happens when the cartels decide to step things up? We've already seen them use drones to drop bombs on rival gangs in Mexico. What's to stop them from doing the same thing on U.S. soil?
Because what the cartels have proven time and time again is that they will do mostly anything for money.
Imagine a major U.S. city, let's say Phoenix or San Diego. Suddenly, the sky is filled with drones. Not just a few, but hundreds. In an instant, chaos erupts. Explosions rock the city. Emergency services are overwhelmed. The military scrambles to respond, but they're not equipped to deal with this kind of threat. It's like a scene out of a disaster movie. This isn't just wild speculation. Military strategists and homeland security experts are actively wargaming these kinds of scenarios. The scary part? The technology to pull this off already exists. Commercial drones can be modified relatively easily to carry small payloads. And with advances in artificial intelligence and swarming technology, it's becoming possible to control large numbers of drones with minimal human input.
One of Mexico's most powerful cartels, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, has created a specialized elite drone unit where these members of the cartel are being trained to turn commercial drones into flying bombs to attack rivals and Mexican authorities, and that's according to a report from the Daily Beast.
If they're doing this to attack rivals, what's to stop them from turning these tactics against U.S. targets? And it's not just about physical attacks. There's also the potential for these drones to be used in sophisticated psychological warfare operations. The cartels have always understood the power of fear. Now, with drones, they have a new tool to spread that fear far and wide. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of all this is how it's changing the nature of warfare itself. Traditionally, there's been a clear line between criminal organizations and military forces, but these drone operations are blurring that line. The cartels are essentially building their own air forces. They're conducting reconnaissance, launching attacks, and controlling territory from the air. These are military tactics being used by criminal organizations.
Experts say these unmanned high-flying intel-gathering aircraft pose threats to the security of the nation.
They have all this money, all of this power, this increase in size operationally, and these alliances with these adversaries. I would say that these drones do become a national security problem.
It's forcing the U.S. to rethink its entire approach to national security. The line between law enforcement and military operations is becoming increasingly blurred. Can the U.S. treat cartel drone operators as combatants in a war? Do the rules of engagement that apply to traditional military conflicts apply here? And what about international law? If a cartel drone crosses the border from Mexico, does that constitute an act of war? The bottom line is this: the drone threat isn't just changing the tactics of border security, it's fundamentally altering the landscape of international conflict. And right now, it feels like we're scrambling to catch up. So, what are these drones doing in U.S. airspace? Well, for the most part, they're gathering intelligence. They're mapping out our border defenses, tracking the movements of Border Patrol agents, and finding weak spots in its surveillance. It's like they're constantly probing for vulnerabilities. But it's not just about gathering intel. These drones are also being used to transport drugs across the border, and we're not talking about small amounts either. Some of these drones can carry payloads of up to 30 pounds. That might not sound like much, but when you're talking about something like fentanyl, where a dose the size of a grain of sand can be lethal, 30 pounds is an astronomical amount. And here's where it gets really scary. There's growing concern that it's only a matter of time before these drones are used for more sinister purposes on American soil. We've already seen what they can do in Mexico, dropping bombs on rival gangs. What's to stop them from doing the same thing here?
They're using the drones because they can. That's why, unfortunately, it's because they can, because they know it's an extra tool that they can use so they can continue to bring their drugs across, or they can continue to bring people across.
It's a game of cat and mouse, but the mice have suddenly grown wings and learned how to drop explosives. So, what's being done about this? Well, to be honest, not nearly enough. Our current defenses are woefully inadequate. We're basically trying to swat flies with a sledgehammer. There are some tools being deployed. One of them is called the Tethered Aerostat Radar System. It's basically a big balloon with radar attached to it. Here's what one operator had to say about it.
We fly as close to 24/365 as we can. Our law enforcement operators that see that on the radar will then engage and get the drugs, get the bad guys that are waiting for the drugs.
But here's the problem. These systems were designed to spot planes and helicopters, not small drones. It's like trying to catch a mosquito with a fishing net. The Mexican government is also trying to step up its game. President López Obrador has announced plans to equip the Mexican army with anti-drone technology, but given how deeply cartels have infiltrated some parts of the government and military, there's concern about how effective this will truly be. And it's not just about technology. There are legal hurdles too. Current laws weren't written with drone warfare in mind. There's ongoing debate about what exactly Border Patrol agents are allowed to do when they spot one of these drones. Can they shoot it down, jam its signal? And if they do, what happens if it crashes and hurts someone? It's a complex problem with no easy solutions. And while the politicians and bureaucrats debate, the cartels are innovating. They're constantly upgrading their drones, making them faster, more powerful, harder to detect. But let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture, because this drone issue is just one part of a much larger crisis at the U.S. Mexico border. We're talking about a region where drug trafficking, human smuggling, and organized crime collide in a perfect storm of violence and corruption. It's a place where cartels have set up their own shadow governments. Imagine driving down a highway and suddenly coming face to face with one of these cartel checkpoints. It's not staffed by police or military. It's run by heavily armed cartel members, and you have no choice but to stop and do whatever they say.
Guárdame el teléfono, por favor, porque no te lo quiero quitar. Ok. Guárdamelo. Oh, no, que tenemos el mapa nomás. Bueno, hijo, hay que ponerle $1000 aquí para la mañana, 500 y 500 para que se me vayan bien. Le voy a dar una clave.
It's everyday reality for people living in these areas, and it's not just about drugs anymore. These cartels have diversified. They're into everything from human trafficking to illegal mining. They've become like multinational corporations, but with AK-47s instead of briefcases. The violence is off the charts. We're talking about mass graves, public executions, entire towns living in fear.
They are finding severed heads in public parks, arms and legs in trash bags, bodies wrapped in blankets outside their homes or next to schools.
It's a level of brutality that's hard for most of us to even comprehend. And caught in the middle of all this are ordinary people just trying to live their lives. Many of them feel like they have no choice but to flee, risking everything to try and cross into the U.S.
Daniel made the 5,000-kilometer trip with his 2 young cousins to escape gang violence and poverty back home.
It's a humanitarian crisis on top of a security crisis. And then there's the fentanyl epidemic. This synthetic opioid is flooding across the border, killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. It's so potent that an amount smaller than a grain of sand can be lethal.
It's impossible to notice in a few lines of coke or a press pill. It's killing over 60,000 people a year, and Americans are now more likely to die from an accidental opioid overdose than in a car crash.
The cartels are making billions from this stuff, and they're using that money to fund their other operations, including their drone program. So, what's the solution? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Different administrations have tried different approaches. The Trump administration took a hardline stance, focusing on building a border wall and threatening to designate cartels as terrorist organizations. Trump even floated the idea of military intervention.
Also said recently that if you're reelected, you would send special forces and, quote, other military assets to Mexico to stop the drug cartels. The Mexican president is very much against this. You're going to start a war?
Well, he's a friend of mine. He's a great guy. He's a friend of mine. He's a socialist, but you can't have everything. Mexico's petrified of the cartels. The cartels are running Mexico.
But if we send our troops across the southern border, you know better than I do that the
but
Mexican
they're
president,
sending-
if he doesn't like it, we're in a war.
I know, but well, I'm not too worried about that war.
What's more, his defense secretary, Mark Esper, even said he had to pull him back from launching missile attacks on cartel leaders. The Biden administration, on the other hand, has focused more on addressing root causes like poverty and lack of opportunity in Central America. They've also emphasized targeting the financial networks that cartels use to move their money. But regardless of the approach, one thing is clear: the drone threat is a game changer. It's forcing us to rethink our entire approach to border security. Some experts are calling for increased investment in counter-drone technology. Others are pushing for stricter regulations on drone sales and usage. And there's growing talk about the need for international cooperation to tackle this issue. Because here's the thing, this isn't just a border problem anymore. As drone technology continues to advance and become more accessible, there's concern that we could see these tactics being used by criminal organizations all over the world. Imagine a future where drug dealers in major cities are using drones for deliveries, where gangs are conducting aerial surveillance of rival territories, where terrorists are using off-the-shelf drones as weapons. It's a scary thought, but it's a very real possibility if we don't get ahead of this issue. So, where do we go from here? Well, that's the big question. One thing's for sure, we can't afford to ignore this problem. The skies above our border have become a new frontier in the war on drugs, and right now, it feels like we're losing. But there's hope.
Judd says it's time for law enforcement to evolve.
We have to beef up our intel. We have to beef up understanding and knowing where these drones are coming from, when they're going to come, where they're going to land. If we can do that, we can be much more successful.
It's going to take a combination of new technologies, smarter policies, and international cooperation. But if we can get it right, we might just be able to turn the tide in this high-tech battle for the border. As we've seen, the drone threat at the U.S. Mexico border is a complex and evolving issue that's pushing us into new frontiers of warfare. It's a great reminder of how quickly technology can change the game in the ongoing struggle against drug cartels and organized crime. As we move forward, it's crucial that we stay informed and engaged with this issue. The security of our borders and the safety of communities on both sides depend on our ability to adapt and respond to these new challenges. Now, I want to hear from you. If you were in charge of border security, what innovative solution would you propose to counter this growing drone threat? Maybe you've got an idea for a new technology, or perhaps a completely different approach to the problem. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Who knows? Your idea might just be the breakthrough we need in this high-tech battle for the border. As always, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to always stay updated on similar stories. Until next time, stay safe.